The Fraser River Discovery Center sits on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Territory acknowledgement is one small part of reconciliation, so please take a moment to think about other ways that you can participate in reconciliation with Indigenous communities. Hello and welcome to the Fraser River Discovery Center at home. My name is Danica and today we are continuing our series on sit spots. If you don't know what a sit spot is, I encourage you first to go to our website or YouTube channel and check out a video called Intro to Sit Spots. Then when you're all caught up, come on back to this video. So how has it been going at your sit spot? What kinds of things are you observing? Today I observed that the plants have grown so big since the last time I was here that I almost couldn't find my sit spot. I got lost. Have you ever wondered who hangs out at your sit spot after dark? Well, in today's activity, you can find out. We are going to make some tasty moth broth to attract insects and other invertebrates to your sit spot. You've probably seen insects already at your sit spot, but if you want to see a whole bunch, the best time to do it is just after the sun sets. A lot of insects are super active at this time, as the darkness makes it easier to avoid being eaten by predators. Many insects absolutely love fermented foods. Fermentation is a process that breaks down sugars into more simple compounds. When you see sugar in your pantry, it looks just like little white grains of sand, but if you looked at it under a microscope, you'd see a really complex structure, like a Lego castle that has 7 towers and 5 drawbridges on a hot air balloon and a 3-story stable and a maze and just so much going on. Fermentation takes that super complex sugar and it breaks it down into simpler pieces, like taking apart that wild Lego castle into all the individual Lego pieces. This makes it easier to digest when eaten. Some examples of fermented foods are kimchi, miso, sauerkraut, kombucha, some yogurts, and alcohol. Insects really like alcohol because it's got all those broken down sugars and lots of yummy yeast. For our moth broth, I'm going to suggest a couple different ways to make it using alcohol like beer or wine or old fruit juice. If you're using alcohol, make sure to get permission from a grown-up. And remember, we're making this moth broth for the insects, not for ourselves. Do not drink the moth broth. Leave it all for the insects. You probably wouldn't want to drink it anyways though, because it's going to smell pretty funky. To make your moth broth, you'll need something fermented and something sweet. Your fermented thing can be old wine or stale beer, or if you don't want to use alcohol, some old fruit juice that's starting to smell a little funny. It smells funny because it's starting to ferment. No matter which you choose, make sure it's something that's been sitting out for a few days, something that's starting to smell a little off, something you definitely wouldn't want to drink. For your something sweet, you could use honey, sugar, or molasses. Take your 2 ingredients and mix them together in a bowl or a blender. We're not making a cake here, so exact amounts aren't super important. You just want to make sure your moth broth is kind of thick and definitely sticky. If it's not thick enough, add in an overripe banana, the one that got forgotten on the counter that's covered in black spots and starting to look kind of squishy. Now that you've got your moth broth, you need to decide how you want to give it to your insects. If your sit spot is in your backyard or somewhere private, you could take your moth broth and spread it directly onto the trunk of a tree. If your sit spot is in a public place or you'd prefer not to make your tree all sticky, you can spread the moth broth onto strips of cloth. An old t-shirt or pillowcase would work great. Cut it into strips, dip the cloth in the broth, giving it a good soak. You can then tie your strips of cloth onto a tree. Please make sure to remove the strips of cloth when you're all done. We don't want to leave a mess. However you decide to deliver your moth broth, timing is important. Set up your moth broth on your tree at dusk as the sun is setting. Then wait until it gets dark and go out with a flashlight to see who came to your picnic. After spending time looking at the different insects and invertebrates that came to eat, make some observations in your sit spot notebook, starting with the date, the weather, and in this case, the ingredients of your moth broth. What kinds of critters do you see? Do you know any of their names? If you join me for the sit spot video on Seek, you could use that to try to identify them, or you could make up your own names. What are they doing? Are they interacting with each other? And remember how you wrote down the ingredients for your moth broth? This is important information if you want to try this experiment again. Do different ingredients attract different insects to your sit spot? Summer is a great time to use moth broth because there's so many insects and invertebrates flying around. But what about trying it at different times of the year? There's just so many questions you could ask and answer with this experiment. Thanks for joining me today. Check out our website for more Fraser River Discovery Center at home and other upcoming programs. And be sure to check back in a couple weeks as we continue our series on sit spots and learn about phenology wheels.